Hello and welcome to Ali's House Unlocked. I'm Ali and this podcast is a little window into my world as a childminder. So if you're a parent already at Ali's house, a parent who is researching their childcare options, somebody who's interested in early years childcare, or a practitioner looking to share practice, you're in exactly the right place. And today we're going to be focusing on one of the prime areas of learning, communication and language. I'm going to be focusing on the development of children aged 0 to 3 because that's the age group that I work with. And in order to keep this short and sweet for you, I am going to grossly paraphrase a whole load of comprehensive and reputable research. I just want you to know that the research that underpins everything that I'll be speaking about over the next 9 minutes or so is widely accepted across the industry today. And if you want to find out any more about children's communication and language development, a great place to start is the BBC's Tiny Happy People website or Speech and Language UK website, and I'll make sure the links for those are in the description. So super briefly, I'm going to first break down children's speech and language development so that we understand what typical development looks like. And in knowing a little bit about that developmental theory, we can then better understand the hows and whys of supporting our children in our homes. So firstly, I'm going to ask you to picture children's speech and language development as a pyramid. The bottom layer of the pyramid, which is arguably the foundational layer for all healthy learning experiences, is attachment to a caregiver. That trusting, loving, responsive and consistent relationship with a caregiver. We're not going to learn to interact and communicate if we don't have someone to interact with. When children have a secure attachment to a nurturing caregiver who gives consistent and positive interactions, then the brain lights up like a firework and children are then able to learn. And I think that sounds obvious, but it's important to note that when children aren't feeling in safe company and when they don't feel that secure attachment to a caregiver, that the whole pyramid of development becomes a little shaky and unstable because it's missing that foundational layer. And therefore, it's much harder to climb to the top of that pyramid. Relationships, nurturing interactions, well-being, this comes first. Moving on up the pyramid then, we get to the next layer, which is attention and listening. So the child has their loving adult that's consistently talking with them, engaging and interacting. The child now needs to learn to give attention to what they hear, to actively listen and begin to pay attention to those key words. And attention is a skill. We learn to attend. But it's really important to remember that young children can only pay attention to one thing at a time. They develop from that distractible baby stage to the single-channeled attention stage, but that in itself takes lots of practice and learning. So if you're giving an instruction to your child, but the TV or music is on in the background, then it's making it doubly difficult for your child to hear and process what you're saying. Attention and listening are best supported by providing spaces with minimal distractions. Also, by getting down on the child's level and communicating face to face. And also by limiting the amount of words that you use. So if I'm playing with a 12-month-old stacking the blocks, for example, rather than saying, okay, let's stack the orange block on top of the blue block now, a phrase, a sentence of over 10 words for the child to try and pay attention to and process. Instead, I'll simply say, on top, and I'll model that language in an animated and engaging way that draws attention. And then when I've repeated that on top for a few times, well, then I'll probably start to build the anticipation and I'll say, ready, steady, down, and we'll push the tower down. So there, I've drawn out the child's attention and I'll make that gap and that waiting longer and longer to keep extending that focus and that attention, holding that eye contact just for a little bit longer each time. Another example that my current cohort of children love to do is to sing Humpty Dumpty with a puppet or some kind of representation of Humpty. And we sing, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. and we're singing and we're lifting Humpty Dumpty in the air higher and higher until we build the anticipation, and then he does the fall. And we repeat that over and over again. And when the children are able to engage in that shared activity and that repetition, holding their attention, well, then we're seeing really good listening and attention development. Now, this pyramid model is widely used throughout the sector, and sometimes what you'll see is the next layer is described as play. For me, play is really important. Play is the vehicle for all learning and development. It's not the thing that we do to burn off loads of energy so that we can sit down and get to the important bit of doing the shoulders up learning. Play, particularly for children aged 0 to 5, is the learning, using our bodies, engaging our hearts and minds. That is the learning. Therefore, I believe that play is intrinsic to all of the layers of this pyramid. It's not a standalone layer. Without playful interactions, we don't build that attachment. Without playful motivation, we don't pay attention to things. So I'll dedicate a whole other episode to play, but for me, it's intrinsic to all the layers. It's not a standalone in itself. Moving on to the next layer of the pyramid then. So once a child is engaging in those playful interactions, they're listening to the speech of those around them, and they're tuning into those key words that they hear repeated again and again, well, then a child can begin to understand those words. And you'll have seen this with your own children, that children first understand a lot more words than they will say. And that's because it comes first in the progression pyramid. First comes an understanding of my own name, maybe some familiar phrases or nouns such as bye-bye or bedtime or nanny, for example. And then children develop understanding of simple questions, simple instructions, and they understand a greater range of nouns, maybe pointing to familiar objects when they're asked about them in a book, for example. So as they hear more vocabulary, they'll be able to build understanding of longer instructions with more information carrying words, such as put that book on the shelf, please. And as they reach their mid-twos, your child probably won't need a familiar context to understand those instructions anymore. And they'll begin to understand concepts, story sequences, a variety of questioning language. Again, it's really important that we are aware of understanding as its own distinct layer in the learning progression, just like listening and attention. And it needs continued support throughout a child's academic life. On a little side note, having a wide-ranging vocabulary is not just beneficial for academic attainment. As with all of this stuff, imagine every word that your child is able to understand and use builds a palette with which they can paint their understanding of the world around them. And I know I want my child to see the world with the most colourful and vibrant palette possible, because that colour palette will frame their life's experiences. Okay, so moving on again before I get too deep and emotional. The next layer up, and we're nearly at the top now, is expressive language. So at first, this stage is crying. And it's important that we understand crying as communication and not unwanted behaviour. Then beyond crying, a child starts to babble, starts to intonate, starts to make sounds that mirror adults. And then they start to gain single words and then put two words together. And around the age of 2, then the language explodes and children learn new words all of the time. And then they're forming 3-word phrases, asking simple questions, using simple emotion language and so on. When talking to your child, as they begin to acquire language, it's really helpful to keep your phrases simple and use the 1+ rule. So if your child is currently speaking in single words, you can speak back in 2-word phrases. So they might point at a dog and say, dog. And you might respond, yes, dog, noisy dog, or hello, dog. And I've heard several times from parents that they don't want to patronise their child by speaking to them in baby language, in inverted commas. But it's not patronising, it's empowering. Because when we model language in the way that research tells us is most effective for our child's growing brain, then it empowers their voice and therefore empowers their control over the world around them. And if I'm constantly talking in 7, 8, 9 word sentences, then how much harder is it for my child to process what I'm saying, pick out the key bits, and have the confidence to have a go and mirror it back? So instead of, do you want to put your shoes on now? Let's go. We can simplify and we can say, shoes on, Jimmy, shoes on. Finally, at the top of the pyramid, we get to speech sounds, which is the way children articulate the words that they're using. Accurate speech sounds come quite a while after talking begins. Children should be using most single phonemes by somewhere in the region of 3 years old, particularly sounds like p, h, d, and t. There are a few that come later, especially some of the trickier sounds like th and sh and ch. So by the age of 3, I think a good marker is that adults who are not familiar with your child should be able to largely understand what he or she is saying. There are both cognitive and physical issues that can get in the way of children's speech production, such as hearing difficulties, for example. But one thing that we can definitely take control of when it comes to supporting children's speech sounds is dummy use. At 12 months, dummies in the daytime have a detrimental impact on children's speech. If a child needs a dummy at bedtime in order to soothe and to get to sleep, fine for now, but not at all in waking hours. Not even during the bedtime story, for example, because it prevents your child from doing that lovely joining in and modelling your language. And not during tantrums or meltdowns, because remember, we said that crying is a form of communication, and think about what message we're sending when a child's communication gets plugged by a dummy. Okay, so that's the pyramid. Attachment at the bottom, attention and listening, understanding, talking, and then speech sounds at the top, and play intrinsic to all of it. So after all of that information, I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for supporting your child's communication and language, taking all of that information and implementing it into your interactions. But 10 is a lot, so maybe pick 1 or 2 at a time and have a go at being mindful of them during your next play interaction with your child. Number 1, talk. Which sounds obvious, doesn't it? But children need to have talking modelled for them to start to talk back. And in this busy modern world where we spend so much of our time in front of screens, in cars, travelling to and from places, in forward-facing pushchairs, sometimes we just need to be reminded to talk. And, you know, we want our children to hear about 12,000 words a day. So let's get chatting. Number 2, get face-to-face. That means getting down on your child's level on the floor. And let's think about how often we achieve that, especially when we're out and about. Remember the pyramid and the bottom, listening and attention right at the bottom, at the foundation. If you're stood behind the pushchair, you could be pointing to things and pointing out all the wonderful vocabulary in the world. But if you haven't got that face-to-face, it's really hard for your child to take that in, and they're probably being distracted by all the other things that you are not pointing to. So face-to-face wherever we can. Number 3, simplify and shorten your sentences. Remember the 1+ rule. Number 4, be animated and have fun. Remember that listening and attention, again, is at the bottom, and so we need to be engaging and capture that attention in order to move up the pyramid. Number 5, sing. And I've heard so often, I hate singing, I hate nursery rhymes. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to tell you that you just need to suck it up, because nursery rhymes are so good for your child's speech and language development. There's no 2 ways about it, I'm afraid. And I know people who are heavily invested in their child's learning to read and write, and they're buying phonics books at the age of 2, but they've never sung a nursery rhyme in their life. Nursery rhymes teach us about rhythm in our language. They help our phonological awareness. So that's our understanding of alliteration and rhyme patterns and syllables, all those things that we need as a foundation to engage in systematic synthetic phonics later on in our school career. If you want your child to be a good reader or writer, experts say that children who know around 8 nursery rhymes by the time they're 4 by heart are usually amongst the best readers and spellers in their class by the time they're 8. So that's food for thought. Number 6, reduce background noise. Again, coming back to the pyramid, coming back to that listening and attention, knowing about that single channeled attention. If the TV is on and the child isn't watching it, why is it on? Number 7, slow down. Something that I haven't done in this episode, but slowing down in your communication, in your play, in your presence, it helps us to consider our words carefully, and it helps our children to tune into our communication more effectively. Number 8, stop asking so many questions. What's that called? What colour is it? How many are there? What shape is that? Pressure, pressure, pressure. And if you know your child knows the answer and you know the answer, why are you asking the question? Closed questions stop conversations, and they stop your child's verbal expression, limiting that range of lovely words that just might have been on the tip of their tongue. Commentating on what you see or what is happening and leaving pauses for your child to join in is a far better way of showing your child that you value their voice and supporting their speech and communication. So next time your child brings you a picture, for example, instead of saying, "Oh, that's nice, what colour is that?" maybe you can say something like, "Wow, I love the shapes you've used in your picture. I can see long lines, wiggly lines, spirals. I wonder what you were thinking about when you were drawing it." It's an open-ended wondering aloud, which allows your child to come in with whatever's on their mind. Cutting down on the questions is harder than you think because assessment style questioning is ingrained into all of us of a certain age. So you can have fun picking up your partner on their needless questions. Although, can you wash the dishes is not one of them. Number 9, give your child time to respond. So there's about 14 stages that a child has to cognitively move through in order to process what you have said and respond to it. So a response time can take up to 10 seconds after you've offered a comment or a sparing question. So next time you're talking to your child, have a go at leaving a comment and waiting 10 seconds for your child to respond. You'll feel how long that wait is, but that is sometimes how long our children need to be able to offer their response back. Number 10, finally, be in the moment. And this is where I get a bit emotional and wobbly because there really is no truer saying than the days are long, but the years are short. You blink and they grow. And raising children is so hard sometimes, but we don't get it back. I originally wrote, enjoy every moment, but sometimes you can't enjoy every moment, and that's okay. But if we're present, then we can be with our children in the way that they need us to be with them. We can be mindful of ourselves and appreciate where we are right now, slow and steady, hand in hand, day by day. And as a final note, it really does take a village to raise these little folk, and asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. So if you have questions or concerns about your child's speech, language and communication development, then speak to the key worker at their childcare setting, or your health visitor, or GP, or the Speech and Language UK helpline. Go to your local authority's local offer. They may well have speech and language drop-ins or helplines. I know Warwickshire do. Wherever you feel most comfortable to turn, you are the expert in your child, so there's no silly question, and your opinions and your concerns are valid. There's no manual. So draw on the knowledge of experts around you, because you'll never look back and say, oh, we had too much knowledge. So thanks for listening to Ali's House Unlocked, and I hope that was helpful, and I hope you'll be listening again soon. Take care. Bye.